This recording made the 13th of January 1977, approximately 8:15 p.m, of a talk by Mrs. Marjorie Sex on her personal experiences over the last 70 years in Send.
Before we start, I'd like to make one thing quite certain. There's no need for anybody to be tactful about my age. I am 73. I give it two different titles. If I'm talking to school children or little cubs, brownies, I call it I Can Remember. I don't think they always believe me, but that's what I call it. If I'm talking to over 60s or elderly church people, I call it Do You Remember? That needs watching. That's led me into trouble before today because people get so enthusiastic about this. I was doing it to an elderly church group at Woking once, and it reached the stage when I said, well, I better sit down and you tell me. Because they were all saying, oh yes, do yes. Do that. Anyhow, I see tonight we've got a mixed audience of all sorts. Well, I think this will fit everybody, because if you're new-ish to the village, you'd like to know what it was like just where you lived, if there was anything there at all, or whether it was on water mains, or whether you had wells. You like to hear all that sort of thing. If you've come here from another village, it's interesting to discover how much all villages everywhere have a lot in common. You know, when you're talking, you'll hear people say, oh yes, we used to do that, and that's how it goes. Now, the first thing I want you to imagine is what the village was like about 70 years ago. I suppose you can remember things at 3, but we call it 65 years anyhow. Of course, the village was the same size it had got to be. The boundaries, I think, have altered very little, if at all. But I've got a list here of things we didn't have. We didn't have any council houses at all when I was a little girl, and for its size, Send has a lot of council houses. Mixing up houses and flats, there are pretty well 100 in Sandfield Estate. There are, I suppose, 20 at Maze Corner. There's another lot down in Wharf Lane. There are some up at Burnt Common, and there are some in the main road opposite the post office. When you take all those away and put fields in their place, they were all built on farming land, so that they weren't there. The subject that we have to be very careful about, there were hardly any sand pits. Think of that. Hardly any sand pits at all. They again were agricultural land, farms, fruit farms. No made-up roads, as we know them now. Either they were sort of gravelled roads, or they were completely unmade roads over Send Hill from Maze Corner up. In the days when I had babies, it was a real task to push a pram up Send Hill. You stuck in the mud ruts, you really did. You didn't go up alone unless you could help it. And when you got over Send Hill, the road came up in the middle, because on each side of the up bit there were wheels made by the carts, do you see? And there were hardly any houses there, you see. You could go for a walk across what is now Send Hill and pick wild flowers in the middle of what is now the road. So we had no real made-up roads at all. No electricity, no gas, no electricity at all, no street lights, no gas, no cars, or perhaps the first ones just creeping in, but really no cars, therefore no traffic. No main drainage. No main drainage at all. Pat's not here, is he, Pat Thurbin? He was always very interested in what happened about the loos down at the camp that they had down here. Well, I prefer not to think about what happened, because just imagine a whole school with no main drainage. But so it was. Buckets right away across the And then eventually things that you did have a chain to pull, but it all had to be pumped out again afterwards somewhere. And I don't let myself think about where it went or who put it there. But that was that. And if you bear all that in mind, and then think about your own house without any of those things. If you've no gas, no electricity, you've none of the appliances, have you? You've no fridges, no deep freezers, no electric cookers, no electric light, no electric hot water heating, or no television, no wireless. We're getting pretty basic, aren't we? But that's how it was. Solid fuel fires for all our cooking. Lights were difficult. Paraffin lamps or candles, or paraffin heaters too. No electric torches to go out with. You had lanterns with candles in them, which blew out about 3 times on each journey. You really did have candle lanterns. And of course, no cars. We had horses and bikes and feet, that's all we had to use there. So that now you're getting an idea of what your village was like, and also what your own home was like, aren't you? Because some of us, I see 1 or 2 here who've been here nearly as long as I have, and they can remember their own homes just like that. Do you remember the flat irons that you used to, yes, Mrs. Tubbs does, that you used to heat on top of the kitchener? No electric iron, of course, just flat irons. In the laundries, and we had 3 of those. We had 3 laundries in this village, and they had these round stoves with railings round them, and you propped all the irons round them, you see, and they used to hold them to their faces to see if they were about right, and then do a little spit to see if it hissed, and then the iron was ready to use. No electric irons at all. So there we were. Now, if all those council houses and sand pits are back to fields, you will realise that there could not have been so very many houses in the village. It would be interesting sometime, only there isn't time tonight, to take a walk right through the village and say what was here and what was there, because it really was farming land, and most of the houses were cottages belonging to the farms, which housed the work people from the farms. Now, we had quite a lot of farms. I think the most interesting one really was Mr. Borman's fruit farm. And that Mr. Borman lived where Ken Bourne lives now, and all those fields around there, right away down Tannery Lane, right away round Send Marsh, they were nearly all strawberry fields, employing casual labour, mostly, people from the village, and gypsies. There were a whole lot of tin huts and caravans and tents out in those fields, picking these strawberries and raspberries, and they were picked into sort of skips and then put into much bigger baskets, and every night during the season an enormous wagon with high sides, horse-drawn, of course, was loaded up with all these baskets of strawberries, and they were driven through the night to the London markets, and then the horses rested and driven back and rested, ready to load up again with fruit for the next day. In those fields at that time, you could see a great big advertisement for Cross and Blackwell, and the Cross and Blackwell factory girls used to be given a working holiday about once a year to come down and pick the strawberries and also, enjoy the spare time and the weekend in the country, which was quite a thing for them. They were paid with little tokens, because it's very difficult to pay people for picking fruit, because of course they didn't all pick the same amount. But you were given these skip baskets. You buy mushrooms in them now, that was the size of them. And when you picked yours full, you took it up to a shed in the corner of the field, and it was roughly weighed, and you were paid according to how many strawberries you picked, and if you picked them decently. And then you were given these little metal tokens. I believe, Ken, you said you'd seen one or two of them.
Yes, Mr. Partridge gave me a couple of dozen. If I name you mentioned that,
you'd have brought them along, yes. You were paid with these little metal tokens, and then you saved them up, you see, till the end of the week. And on Saturday dinner time, everybody then queued in a long queue at the paying place and changed them for money. That was Mr. Borman's farm. As the season went on, there were strawberries and gooseberries and potatoes and peas. I expect I've got those all in the wrong order, but anyhow, they were there. But strawberries were the great thing for the London market. Then we had Sencourt Farm, Jim's farm, which was also attached in a way to Cricket Hill Farm. Cricket Hill Farm was really then the home farm for Send home. They had cows there and their own dairy, and it was the thing. You were very glad to do it. Children of the village used to be sent up to Cricket Hill Farm with milk cans to buy skimmed milk very cheaply. I think about a penny a pint. And we would go up there quite early-ish in the morning and wait for the milk to come into the dairy, and there was a hand separator, and the man who was in charge of the farm, his name was Mr. Langrish, or Langridge, I'm not sure which, and he would come walking up the path from where they had been milking the cows. Most unhygienic everything was 70 years ago, it really was. He would come walking along with his 2 buckets of milk, and he had them on a yoke. And I've often wondered if that yoke is still at Cricket Hill. I wonder if it is. A wooden yoke and a smock and carrying his milk. And it was brought into the dairy and poured into the machine for the separator. And then the cream, of course, was saved for the big house. And the children were allowed to buy the skim milk very cheaply. They did that also at Mr. Hoskins' farm, which is where the something Portland Stud is now, you know, up in St. Barnes Lane. Children could go there and buy cheap milk, skimmed milk. But it was not sold in a shop or in the village. You went and got it. Now, what other farms have I got? Mr. Bajan's farm, Hillside Farm, you know, who knows, up the lane, by Sandy Lane. That was just a farm, and fields where the recreation ground now, that was Mr. Bajan's grazing farm. They kept cows, and an interesting thing they did at Mr. Bajan's farm, they had the village soup kitchen. Because, you see, there's a fair amount of poverty, even if it was a village, because pensions were either not in, or you might have a little pension from somebody you worked for many, many years. And Mr. Lancaster, his picture's here actually, who owned Send Home at that time, he was a bit domineering, but he was very kind, and he saw to it that people in the village didn't want, and he supported a soup kitchen at Mr. Bajan's farm, and Mr. Bajan's mother used to cook this soup, and people could go up with their cans and jugs. They had to pay a little, but very little, for this soup, which I believe was very good. Sandhurst Grange, you know that now, that of course is a home for mentally deficient children, isn't it? Well, that was a very large house, and that supported its own farm, another home farm, down on the main London road, and they always had a manager in that farm, but that really was only to supply the house and any cottages belonging to workmen there. You see, nearly all these farms and big houses had a certain number of houses in which their workmen lived. Most of the houses down Send Road that were there belonged to the big houses. A lot up at between the post office and Mays Corner belonged to Mr. Borman, and quite a lot from Mr. Channon's garage down the road. belonged to Mr. Lancaster, and some of them out here too. They housed his workmen. That applied all along. Of course, Ty Barnes' farm, that again was a home farm. I mean, they grew cereal and things like that, which they traded and sold, but the actual farming business was for their own house and the people that worked for them. There's a rather interesting thing about Mr. Borman's farm. He also had, along Send Marsh Hilllands farm, there was a barn there which has now been pulled down. I always thought it had got one of those marks on it that it mustn't, but it's gone now, and they have houses there. In that barn, they used to hold Sunday night services for the gypsies who worked there. And those gypsy children, somebody got going about this and said, well, there are a lot of children here and they're not going to school at all. Something must be done about this. And some of these children were sent up to what we call it Miss Perry's school, and the great problem of teaching them, because of course they knew very little. They were only spending a season doing the fruit picking, and then they'd be off somewhere else, perhaps into Kent. And they used to have desks for them down in the shed, in the playground. Seems very unkind, but they were so terribly dirty, and things in their heads and things like that. They really had to be taught by themselves. But they were treated very nicely, and they were all very happy. So that was that farm. Have I missed any? Someone will be offended and say you didn't say about my farm. But no, I think that, oh yes, Heath House Farm. It wasn't really a farm, but you know where Heath Drive is? Yes, well, there was a big house there called Heath House, and they kept a few cows and had, I think, a bit of the broad mead for pasture, and that, again, was just for their own support. Now, Mr. Bajan's farm, that was the one where the milk was sent round the village for sale. I mean, people had to buy milk from somewhere. No one had ever seen a milk bottle. You didn't have milk bottles delivered on your doorstep. Mr. Bajan's sister used to come round in a milk float with a great big churn and a smaller thing with one of these dippers, with a handle at the side, and she would come to your house and you would buy how much milk you wanted. It was never covered in any way. I mean, any stray germ that was about just went in it, but it didn't seem to do anybody any harm. And she drove that round the village, and that lane up past where the Red Cross Centre is now, that was inches deep in mud. But she brought that round. And one more place you could buy milk was at Miss May's shop at May's Corner. It's the Victoria Wine Company now. Well, that was Miss May's shop, or Mrs. May's shop, and her two daughters. And they kept a few cows. This was the most unhygienic of a lot. They kept them out in a field at the back. And on Saturday afternoons, the football club paid there, and so then you brought the cows in and tidied the field up a bit and let the football team in. But nevertheless, you took the milk into the dairy and you sold it there. You went round the back to get that. Now, I think that's dealt with the farms. I'm always interested here in the transport. You talk about transport in Send, everybody says Mr. Brown's horse bus. There's some pictures of it here. But it wasn't the first, really. It was Mr. Cox's horse bus. And Mr. Cox kept his bus down in Tannery Lane. And you may have wondered, if you go down Tannery Lane at all, why those two cottages called Valentine Cottage, why the second one has such a much bigger piece of ground than the first one. And that is because the bus shed was in there. Well, he gave this up when I was a very small girl, and it came over to Mr. Brown, who had his bus yard. Let's get this straight. The co-op, Mrs. Graham's house, 4 more little houses, and the middle one of those was the bus station. And it was a horse bus, 1 horse. I mean, he had 2 horses, but used them one at a time. It wasn't really like the coaches you have on Christmas cards because it was flatter and it only had one horse. It was very much like a hearse, really. It was glass-sided, but the great thing about it was Mr. Brown or Mr. Parsons, who was his driver, sat along the front driving the horse, and up behind them was another seat on which 3 people could sit. Great fun, but awful when the weather was bad. All right in the day, but no real form of lighting the inside of this bus. So, I mean, he had a boy standing on the step at the back with the lantern who sort of got you in. I think about 3 or 4 people sat each side. Well, this bus didn't run terribly regularly because, of course, the poor horse had to rest. It wasn't like a motor bus. You couldn't turn it round and bring it straight back. The horse had to rest, and that gave Mr. Brown, when he got to Woking, sufficient time to do a little bit of shopping for anybody who wanted him to. And he didn't go in much for bus stops. I mean, you saw the bus coming, you just waved and he stopped. He did have a regular stop, of course, at Mays Corner. That's where he started from, finished up at Woking. Now, he, of course, didn't run on Sundays. And as we had no real buses, we were very dependent on the railway. The railway was there at Woking, all right, but you had to get there. Now, you all know, don't you, Mrs. Challen and Mr. Challen, who run the garage. Well, Mrs. Challen's mother was called Mrs. Sale, and Mrs. Sale had a pony and trap. And if you wanted a bus and it was a Sunday, you went and hired Mrs. Sale's trap and she took you to Woking. If your cricket team wanted to go somewhere, or you felt a bit swanky and wanted to take a party for a picnic, then you went to Mr. Brown again and had his wagonette. It only worked, it was fine, because it wasn't covered at all, but you sat along there, I suppose. Well, it certainly could take a whole cricket team. So that was the way that went. Mr. Brown's wagonette, Mr. Brown's bus. I'll ask my own husband, did he do the funerals? He had a hearse as well. And his horses' names were Rowdy and Queenie. Anyhow, that was that part. I've forgotten what the fare was. I was so little I didn't ever have to pay it. You see, somebody paid it for me. How often did it run? 3 or 4 times a day, because this horse had to rest. And it didn't run on Sundays. But we had a carrier, his name was another Mr. Cox, and this carrier went between Ripley and Woking, doing all the things that, taking luggage and stuff about that you couldn't very well take on the bus. I don't know why his name was known to all as Shanger Cox. Oh, and then one other little form of transport were the barges on the way, but they didn't take passengers. They took wheat and timber and occasionally, I think, coal from Guildford along up to Weybridge, where it became part of the Thames. But really interesting was the transport for the post office. The post office was where the post office still is now, but the letters and parcels had to be got from Woking out through to Ripley. Nobody quite believes this, but I assure you it's true. We had a scarlet painted box cart with the royal insignia on the side of it, horse-drawn, of course, and this used to come belting up through the village with the letters, remembering all the time there weren't so very many houses, so it's not as impossible as it sounds. If there was a letter for you, he stopped at your gate, and he had a long copper post horn, and he blew a blast on it, and you went out and got your letter from him. If you weren't in, well, your letter went back into his bag. He wouldn't dream of getting it down and putting it through your letterbox. He took it off again till somebody was there. And he went through that way to Ripley. Well, of course, he only came up through the main road, so the lanes had to have their letters, and dear old Mr. Donks was our postman. He walked down all the lanes, carrying the letters in a bag and the parcels twice a day, and Sundays and Christmas Day, for years and years and years. And that was Mr. Dance. I think that is all the transport business.
Is he the one you told me his name was Morris Dance?
No, that was his son,
Oh,
Morris
his son.
Dance. Isn't it delightful? Yeah, and he spelt it the right way too. Yes, it is. There are one or two odd things I'll tell you about, which don't sort of fit in anywhere. Nobody sold them or anything. Now, I mean, suppose you wanted some ice cream. There wasn't anywhere to get it at all. And a dear, dirty little old Italian used to come through from Woking on a very elaborately painted cart with pony, and he would come up through the village ringing a bell, and you nipped out with your basin or your plate and bought yourself some ice cream from him. I seem to think it was only on Sundays. Not quite infallible, but I think the ice cream only came on Sundays. In the shops, nothing was packaged. Nothing was packaged. You didn't break your fingernails opening a packet of biscuits. They were along the side in great big £7 tins, and you chose which sort you would like, and they didn't mind taking a few out of each of several kinds of tins, provided the price was equal. And they weighed up everything. I still chuckle about this. I was talking about this at Ripley, and I was telling them how they had that dark blue thick paper, and you remember they twisted it into a cone and pinched the bottom and turned the top in, and I glanced round to see that everybody hadn't gone asleep, and 2 or 3 of them were doing this. Yes, they were. They were winding their own cones as they went. They evidently had seen this, you see. That was weighing things up. There were other difficulties of things which couldn't very well be sold in shops, and one of them was paraffin. And so a man called Mr. Harker, who not so very long ago retired from business in Woking, he used to come out with his horse-drawn thing, with a barrel on the back with a tap, and you'd go out and buy your paraffin from him. And he also brought candles and soap and all the things that smelt and would mess up the grocer's shop. You see, that was Mr. Harker. Then a lot of us kept chickens too. And so Gloucester's shop sent out with all sorts of things like bran and oats and wheat and maize, all the things you fed the chickens, they did. If you felt like having winkles and shrimps for tea on Sunday, it was all right, they came too. And muffins with a man, a vase thing on his head, they all came round, and you got them at your door. Now, do you think I've talked long enough and people would like to ask me this and that?
I'd like to ask whether there was a baker's shop in it.
Oh yes, I haven't really done all. Yes, there was a baker's shop, Mr. Webb's shop, which is now called Gladding's Lemons. That was Mr. Webb's baker shop. The bread, of course, was baked on the premises. The bakehouse, I think, is still at the back, and I believe some of the family are still living in Potter's Lane, aren't they? Some of that family, the Webbs. Yes, and it was a grocer's shop as well as a baker's shop. There was a gorgeous shop at Send called Miss Collins, or perhaps Mrs. Collins. Anyhow, it was thatched. And funny, these shops all smelt alike. It was the paraffin lights, you know. They had no electricity or gas. It was either paraffin lamps or candles. And the one at Send was a general grocer, really, very small. And she was a wonderful woman, Miss Collins, very, very old-fashioned, even for then. She used to wear a great big black snood on her head, you know. And she was so kind to these gypsies with these little tokens for payment, because I'm afraid that the gypsies spent quite a lot in unwise ways as the week went on, and so they ran out of money, and you could take your tokens into Miss Collins and spend them as money. And then Miss Collins herself, when it came to swapping over for real money, she would take the tokens back and get real money for them. Miss May's shop, the famous off-licence, that was a grocer's shop too, among being a dairy and all the rest of it. Very dark. I always remember that shop as being very dark, but most obliging. You could always nip round to the back and get anything you want. And she was the only person I ever knew in my life who would let children spend a farthing, and she would. You could go out to the back. It was always a licorice boot lace, but she would let you buy all sorts of hours. You could always knock Miss May up. Then, of course, we've missed out the most important place in the village, haven't we? Sexist blacksmiths. Yes. It really was marvellous. There's something about blacksmiths, you know. I married the Send one and my sister married the Ripley one. There must be something about them. But it really was blacksmiths where they shod horses. And it had a stable door, you know, that opened at the top and then at the bottom, keep the horses in and the kids out. And on a frosty, bitterly cold afternoon, it really was wonderful to see the children coming out from school and rushing down and leaning over the door, and the anvils singing away and the sparks flying. This is a bit romantic, but it was very nice indeed. And horses, of course, were...
Did you ride?
No, I wouldn't know one end horse from the other. I'm thinking if there are any more shops. Mr. Broomfield's, yes, but that was not when I was tiny, was it? No, I'm only saying what I remember when I was tiny. The chemist shop was Mr. Broomfield's shop then, you see. The chemist shop was Mr. Broomfield's, and the shoe shop's the newer of the two. We didn't have a butcher, did we? Mr. Pullin had a little bit of a butcher's in a house, but not as long ago as this. We hadn't got a newsagent. We got no parade and no shops where the laundrette and all those things are. That was all Mr. Bajan's fields, and so was the parade.
Notice above the chemist at the side, where it's got Broomfield, it's got cycle makers and repairers. I wonder if you were wrong though, whether they actually made
No, I don't think so. They repaired them, didn't they? Repaired cycles. Repaired cycles. He didn't make them. He really couldn't claim that. I did claim it, I mean, but he didn't do it. No, is that still on the side? Yes, yes. The keep was originally the post office, wasn't it? The old keep house was the post office. And Mr. Tice's How Many Greats grandfather was at that time the postmaster.
Great Uncle Charlie.
Great Uncle Charlie, yes, he kept the post office there. Oh yes, and I'll tell you another thing, you could buy coal from Mr. Tice. He had coal yard there, and he made coffins. You made coffins then, and they did them in that place there. I'm quite honest about this. I've never found out anything satisfactory about the manor house. I could tell you ever so many fairy stories about it, about a tunnel that's supposed to lead to Newark Abbey, and a horse fair that used to be on the green, but I think they're all fantasy.
I can tell you something that will interest you about it. You've probably heard me say it before. From the tithe apportionments of 1845, the occupier of that house is shown as John Sex.
Oh, well, I better look into that. Maybe I owe something. That wrecked lodge, when you turn around into the Sandhurst Grange Lane, there's a lodge that's completely derelict. Well, that was the lodge for Lady Warncliffe's house. You sort of went in there. And that's interesting too. She had a butler called Mr. Brown, who lived out in the house in the park where Margaret Simpson did live but doesn't now. And I suppose his name would be Lord Warncliffe or something. Anyhow, he did some service in China, and he was the first person to bring Pekingese dogs into this country. Yes, and poor Mr. Brown used to have to take about 5 of these horrid little creatures on strings about the village. Things like clothing. Well, the post office shop was a little bit of a haberdasher, but for clothes you went to Woking or Guildford. Now here's another funny thing, perhaps you can work this one out. The way we went to places, you went up to Woking, But you went down to Old Woking, but you followed exactly the same route. You went into Guildford, you went over to Ripley, and I've never discovered what you did about clams.
How did it feel?
You walked or biked. You walked or biked. And I mean, children of 11, if you were fortunate enough to win a scholarship, nobody put a school coach on for you. It's your parents' business how you got there. And we used to go on bikes. We just did. Well, I went to Woking County School and I had a bike. I mean, no one would call it a bike nowadays, but it was. And it had a nasty little oil lamp with a bit of red one side and green the other, and paraffin in it. And you know, it's quite ordinary to stop about 5 times on the way home when that thing just blew out in the wind. Terrible. Mrs. Sanner's house, of course, was 4 cottages.
Yeah.
That's why Mrs. Sanner has so many staircases. Yes, it really was 4 cottages.
That was in your time,
Yes, it was in my time there were 4 cottages.
Margaret, would you say that traffic was better or worse, say going back 40 years? Having seen lots of old photographs of horses and carts and crowded streets in London, what was it like actually in Send?
Oh, well, there was very, very little traffic. You know, at the Our Forge, say Our Forge, I'm married into it, but you know what I mean, had a big tree stump outside, and men used to sort of sit on it, waiting for it to be time to start again. Well, that was often used as a cricket stump, and you could play cricket across the street. I mean, this is right in Send Street, and children bowled hoops down the middle of the street, and played marbles, of course. Oh, yes. Well, I've finished, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I'll just tell you something now I've finished. There's a photograph of the school here, sitting in the front. There is a little bald-headed horror with a frill around his neck, and I'm now married to him.